The gunshot that rang through Greeley's Main Street that blazing afternoon in July 1882 wasn't meant for anyone in particular, just another cowhand celebrating his monthly wages at the saloon. But it sent the group of newly arrived Polish immigrants scattering in terror across the dusty Colorado thoroughfare. Marisol Bennett stood her ground on the wooden sidewalk, her dark eyes flashing with irritation rather than fear as she watched the frightened families clutch their children and possessions. She'd been translating the land agent's instructions about available homesteads when the disruption occurred, and now her careful work was undone. The immigrants too shaken to focus on the complex information about water rights and filing claims. "Damn fool cowboys," she muttered under her breath, smoothing down her practical brown skirt and adjusting the leather satchel that contained her precious dictionaries and translation notes. At 23, Marisol had carved out an unusual position for herself in this railroad town on Colorado's eastern plains. Her Mexican father and Irish mother had given her a gift for languages that extended far beyond Spanish and English. Through years of self-study and patient practice with every immigrant group that passed through Greeley, she'd become proficient in German, some Italian, and was working on Polish and Czech. The land agent, a portly man named Hutchins, wiped his brow with a handkerchief. "Miss Bennett, perhaps we should reschedule. These folks are too unsettled now." Marisol was already moving toward the immigrants, speaking in careful Polish, her hands open and gestures calm. "It's nothing to fear, just a cowboy with too much whiskey. You're safe. Please come back. This information is important for your families." An older woman with a kerchief tied tight around her gray hair responded, her words tumbling fast. Marisol listened intently, nodding, then replied in the same language. Slowly, the group began to settle, parents soothing children, men straightening their caps and shoulders. Marisol was guiding them back toward the land office when she noticed him. He stood apart from the saloon crowd, a tall cowboy with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. Unlike his whooping companions, he watched the immigrant group with something that looked like concern rather than amusement. When his eyes met Marisol's, he didn't look away or offer the lazy grin most cowboys gave her. Instead, he touched the brim of his hat in a respectful gesture and walked toward them. "Madam," he said, his voice low and surprisingly gentle, "I apologize for the disturbance. Some of the boys forget there's families trying to make a life here." Marisol studied him more carefully. He wore working clothes, a worn leather vest over a chambray shirt, chaps marked with the dust and wear of long days in the saddle. But something in his bearing suggested more thought than the average ranch hand. "Your apology is noted, cowboy. Perhaps you could remind your friends that Greeley was founded as a temperance colony." A flicker of amusement crossed his weathered face. "I suspect that horse left the barn a while back, madam, but point taken." He glanced at the immigrant families, now filing back into the land office. "You speak their language, several languages. It's my work. Must be something to know what people are saying in all those different tongues." He seemed genuinely interested, not mocking. "I'm Russell Vaughn. I work at the Cross Creek Ranch about 10 miles north." Marisol Bennett. She didn't extend her hand, aware of propriety and the watching eyes of the town. "Now, if you'll excuse me, Mr. Vaughn, I have work to complete." She left him standing in the street, but she felt his gaze follow her into the land office. Inside, she pushed the encounter from her mind and focused on the task at hand, carefully explaining in Polish the requirements for filing a homestead claim, the challenges of farming this semi-arid land, the crucial importance of water rights and cooperation with neighbors. The immigrant families listened with the desperate attention of people staking everything on understanding these foreign systems. 2 hours later, when she finally emerged from the office, her throat dry from talking and her head aching from the mental effort of constant translation, she was surprised to find Russell Vaughn sitting on the bench outside, his hat in his hands. He stood when he saw her. "Miss Bennett, I was hoping I might buy you a lemonade at the hotel, as an apology for the disruption earlier." Marisol hesitated. She'd learned to be cautious with men's attentions. Her mixed heritage and unusual occupation made her an oddity in Greeley, neither fully accepted by the town's more established families nor quite fitting with the rougher elements. But something in Russell Vaughn's direct gaze and the patient way he'd waited struck her as genuine. "One lemonade," she agreed, "but I have another appointment in an hour." They walked to the Union Colony Hotel, a modest but respectable establishment. In the dining room, Russell ordered 2 lemonades and some cake, and they sat at a corner table away from the curious stares of other patrons. "How does a cowboy come to be interested in languages?" Marisol asked, deciding to take control of the conversation. Russell smiled, his fingers turning his glass slowly. "I guess the same way you did. Need mostly and curiosity. At the ranch we get hands from all over. Last year we had 3 Swedish brothers who barely spoke English. Good workers, but hard to communicate what needed doing. I picked up some words here and there, enough to get by. Made me realize how much I was missing, you know. Like there's whole conversations happening around me and I only catch every 5th word." "Most people don't care enough to try," Marisol said, surprised by his perspective. "Most people are missing out then." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "Miss Bennett, I have a proposition for you." "A business proposition," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "Would you consider teaching me? One of the languages you know, I could pay for lessons." Marisol sat back, studying him. "Why? Because I'm tired of being ignorant. Because I work with men who deserve to be understood properly. Because—" he hesitated, then continued with surprising honesty, "because I don't plan to be just a ranch hand forever. I've been saving money, learning the business. Someday I want my own spread, and when I do, I want to be the kind of man who can deal fairly with whoever comes to work for me, no matter where they're from." It was a longer answer than she expected, and more revealing. Marisol found herself reassessing the man across from her. "What language did you have in mind? What would you suggest? What's most useful around here?" she considered. "German or Swedish, probably. We get a lot of immigrants from those countries filing homesteads. Or Spanish, given that we're so close to New Mexico territory and we have plenty of Mexican ranch hands." "Spanish," Russell said immediately. "I know a handful of words already, might give me a head start, and truth is, I should have learned it years ago. Seems disrespectful to work alongside men and not be able to speak their language." Marisol felt a small shift in her chest, a warming toward this unusual cowboy. "All right. I charge 50 cents per lesson, 1 hour. I'm free on Tuesday and Thursday evenings and Sunday afternoons." "Tuesday and Thursday suit me fine. Where do we meet?" They arranged to use a meeting room at the church, a neutral and respectable location. As they finalized the details, Marisol found herself curious about this Russell Vaughn in a way that went beyond professional interest. He had an earnestness that was rare in men she encountered, and despite his rough occupation, he spoke thoughtfully and listened carefully. Over the following weeks, Marisol discovered that Russell was an excellent student. He arrived promptly for each lesson, always clean despite his long work days, with a small notebook where he carefully wrote down new words and phrases. His pronunciation was terrible at first. his tongue stumbling over the rolling R's and soft vowels, but he practiced diligently and improved steadily. "No, no," Marisol said, trying not to laugh during their fourth lesson. "It's Pero, not Pero. You just said dog instead of butt." Russell grinned, unashamed. "Well, that would make the sentence interesting, wouldn't it? I want to go to town, dog. I have no money." She did laugh then, and realized it was happening more often in these lessons. Russell had a self-deprecating humor that made his mistakes endearing rather than frustrating. But he was also serious about learning, asking questions about grammar and syntax that showed he was thinking deeply about the language's structure. "You're picking this up faster than I expected," Marisol admitted as August heat settled over Greeley. They'd progressed from simple vocabulary to basic conversations, and Russell could now handle rudimentary exchanges about work, weather, and daily life. "I practice at the ranch," he said. "There's 2 Mexican hands, Tomás and his cousin Diego. They've been patient with me, correcting my mistakes, though Diego laughs every time I try to use the subjunctive." "The subjunctive is difficult," Marisol acknowledged. "Even some native speakers use it incorrectly." Russell set down his pencil and looked at her directly. "Can I ask you something personal, Miss Bennett?" She tensed slightly but nodded. "How did you come to do this work? Translation, I mean. It's not exactly a common occupation for a woman." Marisol had been asked versions of this question before, usually with judgment or prurience underlying it. But Russell's tone held only genuine interest. She found herself answering honestly. "My father came from Chihuahua, worked as a freighter on the Santa Fe Trail. My mother's family were Irish, came over during the famine. They met in Kansas, married despite both families' objections. I grew up hearing Spanish, English, and some Irish Gaelic all mixed together. My mother taught me to read in English, my father in Spanish. I was always good with words, good at hearing the patterns in how people spoke." She paused, remembering. "When my parents died of cholera, I was 16. I had no family willing to take in a mixed-blood girl. I came to Greeley because I'd heard it was a new town, a place where people might be more concerned with what you could do than where you came from. I started out cleaning at the hotel, but I'd help translate when immigrant guests needed assistance. Eventually, I had enough of a reputation that the land office and the railroad started hiring me regularly." "You built this all yourself," Russell said quietly. "That's remarkable." Marisol felt heat rise in her cheeks, unused to such straightforward praise. "It's just work." "It's more than that. You're helping people navigate a completely foreign world. Without you, those families would be lost, probably cheated by unscrupulous land agents or snake oil salesmen. You're doing something important." The sincerity in his voice caught at something in Marisol's chest. She busied herself gathering the lesson materials, unsettled by the feelings rising in her. This was a business arrangement, she reminded herself. Professional. But as the weeks continued, professional boundaries grew harder to maintain. Russell began arriving a few minutes early to their lessons, and they'd talk about their days before starting the actual instruction. He told her about life at Cross Creek Ranch, about the cattle and horses, about the complex ecology of managing grassland and water resources. He spoke about his dream of owning his own ranch someday. Not a massive spread, but a well-run operation with good stock and fair treatment for his hands. Marisol, in turn, found herself sharing more than she intended. She told him about the different immigrant groups passing through Greeley, their hopes and fears, the cultural misunderstandings that could derail a family's entire future. She talked about her frustration with the limitations placed on her as a woman, how she had to be twice as professional as any man to be taken half as seriously. "Doesn't seem right," Russell said one evening in early September. They'd finished the lesson and were walking slowly toward Marisol's boarding house, a routine that had developed naturally over the past month. "You've got more education and ability than half the men running businesses in this town." "Right and reality aren't always the same thing," Marisol replied, though she appreciated his indignation on her behalf. "Maybe not, but reality can change. This whole town is proof of that. 10 years ago, this was empty prairie. Now look at it." They'd reached the boarding house. Russell stopped at the gate as he always did, respecting propriety. In the fading light, his eyes were serious. "Miss Bennett, Marisol, I need to be honest with you. These lessons, they've become the best part of my week, and I don't think it's just the Spanish I'm learning." Marisol's heart quickened. She'd been aware of her own growing feelings, tried to suppress them as impractical, but hearing Russell voice something similar made them surge forward undeniably. "Mr. Vaughn, Russell, I'm not sure this is appropriate." "Probably not," he agreed. "But I've never been one to ignore what's true just because it's complicated. I care about you. I think you might care about me too, and I'd like to see if maybe we could be more than just teacher and student." Marisol looked up at him, at this cowboy who'd surprised her at every turn with his thoughtfulness, his humor, his genuine respect for her work and abilities. She thought about caution, about propriety, about all the reasons this was complicated. Then she thought about the way her spirits lifted every Tuesday and Thursday, about how she'd started paying more attention to her appearance on lesson days, about how empty the evenings felt when she didn't see him. "I'd like that too," she said softly, "but we need to be careful. My reputation is all I have in terms of professional standing." "I understand. We'll do this properly. May I call on you Sunday afternoon? We could walk out to the river, bring a proper chaperone if you prefer. Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house would probably accompany us. She's always saying I work too hard and need more society." Russell's smile was like sunrise. "Sunday then. 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock, Marisol agreed. That Sunday, Russell arrived precisely on time, dressed in clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his hair neatly combed and his boots polished. He brought flowers, simple prairie wildflowers but carefully arranged. Mrs. Henderson, a widow in her 50s who ran the boarding house with brisk efficiency and a soft heart, agreed to accompany them with an approving nod. They walked along the Cache la Powder River, the cottonwoods golden with early autumn color. Mrs. Henderson stayed within sight but far enough back to give them space for conversation. Russell told Marisol about growing up in Missouri, the youngest of 4 brothers, how he'd come west at 18 seeking opportunity and adventure. "Found more hard work than adventure mostly," he said with a laugh, "but I've never regretted it. There's something about this land, the space of it, the feeling that you can build something from nothing if you're willing to work." "You miss your family?" Marisol asked. A shadow crossed his face. "Lost my parents and one brother to fever before I left. The other 2 brothers have their own lives back in Missouri, families and farms. We write occasionally, but we're not close. I think coming west was partly about starting fresh, leaving those sad memories behind." Marisol understood that impulse. "After my parents died, I couldn't bear to stay in Kansas. Everything reminded me of them. Coming to Colorado felt like I could breathe again, even though it was hard and lonely at first." Russell reached for her hand, a gentle gesture that felt natural despite the newness of their courtship. "Maybe we found each other because we both understand that kind of loss." Over the following months, their relationship deepened. They continued the Spanish lessons, which became as much about conversation as instruction. Russell's Spanish improved dramatically, and he began using it confidently at the ranch. More importantly, They spent Sundays together, sometimes with Mrs. Henderson, sometimes in more public settings like church socials or community gatherings. Marisol was surprised by how seamlessly Russell fit into different aspects of her life. When a group of Czech immigrants arrived in October, struggling to communicate about a dispute with a supplies merchant, Russell helped Marisol navigate the situation, using his position as a respected ranch hand to lend weight to her translations and ensure the immigrants were treated fairly. "You didn't have to get involved," Marisol said afterward, grateful and touched. "Of course I did. They were being cheated. Besides, this is what you do every day, standing up for people who can't speak for themselves yet. I'm honored to help." In November, Russell invited Marisol to visit Cross Creek Ranch. It was a significant step, meeting his employer and seeing his daily life. Marisol borrowed Mrs. Henderson's mare and rode out one Sunday afternoon, surprised by the beauty of the landscape despite its austere nature. The ranch was well maintained, with sturdy corrals and a decent barn, herds of cattle grazing the brown autumn grass. Russell introduced her to Tom Cross, the ranch owner, a weathered man in his 50s who treated his hands with gruff fairness. Cross raised an eyebrow at Marisol's presence but said only, "Russell's told me about you, Miss Bennett. Says you're teaching him Spanish and about half a dozen other useful things." "He's an excellent student," Marisol replied diplomatically. "He's an excellent hand," Cross said. "Smart, reliable, good with the stock. I've told him when he's ready to start his own operation, he'll have my help." He looked between them with shrewd eyes. "Something tells me that time might be coming sooner than I expected." After Cross left, Russell showed Marisol around the property. They ended up sitting on a fence rail, watching horses graze in the distance, the mountains' purple shadows to the west. "Mr. Cross wasn't wrong," Russell said quietly. "I've been thinking about starting my own place. I've got money saved and Cross has offered to help me secure a loan for stock. There's a section of land adjacent to his property, has a good creek running through it. He'd sell it to me at a fair price." He turned to Marisol, his expression serious. "But before I make that decision, I need to know something. Is there a future here between us? Because if I'm building something, I want to build it with you." Marisol's breath caught. They'd been courting for 3 months, a respectable but not lengthy time, yet she knew her answer with absolute certainty. "Yes," she said. "Yes, there's a future. I've never been more sure of anything." Russell's face broke into a grin. He jumped down from the fence and helped her down, his hands warm on her waist. "Then I have something to ask you properly." He didn't kneel, there in the dust with the horses watching, but he took both her hands in his eyes never leaving hers. "Marisol Bennett, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I know I'm just a cowboy with more dreams than means right now, but I swear I'll work every day to build a life worthy of you. I'll respect your work, support your independence, and love you with everything I have." Tears pricked Marisol's eyes. This man who'd started as just another cowboy had seen her truly, valued her completely. "Yes, Russell. Yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her then, a gentle kiss full of promise, and Marisol felt like she was finally home. They were married in January 1883. A small ceremony at the church with Mrs. Henderson and the Cross family in attendance. Along with several of the immigrant families, Marisol had helped over the months. The church was drafty and cold despite the pot-bellied stove, but Marisol barely noticed, focused entirely on Russell's face as they spoke their vows. For witnesses, Tomás and Diego stood with Russell, both men wearing their best clothes and grinning widely. Tomás had told Marisol privately that Russell was like a brother to them, and they were honored to see him so happy. A young German woman named Greta, whose family Marisol had helped settle on a homestead, stood as Marisol's attendant, her presence a symbol of the connections Marisol had built in her community. After the ceremony, they held a simple celebration at the hotel dining room. Tom Cross gave a toast, his voice gruff with emotion. To Russell and Marisol, may they build something as strong and lasting as this Colorado land. Russell and Marisol moved into a small house on the property Russell was purchasing from Cross. It was modest, just 3 rooms, but it was theirs. While Russell worked on establishing the ranch, negotiating for cattle and building up the necessary infrastructure, Marisol continued her translation work. They discussed it extensively before marriage, both agreeing that her skills were too valuable and her work too important to abandon. Besides, Russell had said, we'll need the income while I get the ranch profitable. But more than economics, Russell genuinely supported Marisol's independence. He never questioned her spending days in town, never suggested her work was inappropriate for a married woman. When other ranchers' wives commented on it, Russell defended her plainly and without apology. My wife is educated and skilled. Why would I want her to waste that? The first year of marriage was challenging. Russell worked brutal hours establishing the ranch, up before dawn to tend stock, mending fences, negotiating with buyers, managing the complex logistics of a cattle operation. Marisol balanced her translation work with learning to manage a household, cook for ranch hands during busy seasons, and navigate the social expectations of being a rancher's wife. But the challenges were balanced by deep happiness. They'd built something honest between them, a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. On quiet evenings, they'd sit together reviewing account books or practicing Spanish, Russell's facility with the language now quite good. Sometimes they'd just talk, sharing their days, their hopes, the small observations that made up a life. In the spring, Marisol realized she was pregnant. She told Russell one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky impossible colors. I saw Dr. Evans today. He confirmed what I suspected. We're having a baby, probably in October. Russell went very still, then turned to her with wonder on his face. Truly, truly. He gathered her carefully into his arms, his face buried in her hair. I'm going to be a father. We're going to be parents. Are you happy? Marisol asked, suddenly uncertain. Happy doesn't begin to cover it, terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. He pulled back to look at her. How are you feeling? What do you need? They navigated the pregnancy together. Marisol continued working into the summer, though she gradually reduced her hours as she grew larger and more tired. Russell was solicitous without being overbearing, understanding that Marisol needed to maintain her independence even as her body changed. In July, a situation arose that demonstrated how much Marisol's work had come to matter in the community. A group of Italian immigrants arrived with plans to establish a farming collective. But the contract they'd been sent was deliberately misleading, trying to lock them into predatory terms with a corrupt land speculator. Marisol, now 7 months pregnant and moving slowly in the summer heat, spent days working through the complex legal language, translating not just words but implications and consequences. Russell supported her completely, even when it meant she was exhausted and distracted. He brought her meals while she worked, made sure she rested, and when the speculator tried to intimidate the immigrant families, Russell showed up with Tom Cross and several other ranchers to make clear that such behavior wouldn't be tolerated. You're changing this community, Russell told Marisol that night, making it better, fairer. Our child is going to grow up seeing their mother stand up for what's right. Our child is going to grow up with a father who does the same, Marisol replied, resting against him. In October, after a long and difficult labor that left Russell pacing holes in the floor downstairs, Marisol gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him James, after Russell's late father, with the middle name Rodrigo, after Marisol's father. Russell held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming unabashedly down his face. "He's perfect. You're perfect. Thank you, Marisol. Thank you for this gift." Those first months of parenthood were exhausting and beautiful. Marisol scaled back her translation work significantly, taking only the most critical jobs, while Russell managed the ranch and helped with the baby whenever he could. They were sleep-deprived and overwhelmed, but also profoundly happy. "I never imagined this," Marisol said one night, feeding James while Russell sat beside them in the lamplight. "A family of my own, being loved like this, it seems almost impossible." "It's not impossible, it's what you deserve, what we both deserve." As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Russell's careful management and fair dealings built a strong reputation. He employed a mix of Anglo, Mexican, and immigrant ranch hands, and his ability to communicate in Spanish made him a sought-after partner for other ranchers working with diverse crews. The ranch expanded gradually, always within their means, always sustainable. Marisol resumed more regular translation work as James grew older, sometimes bringing him along to town. He grew up in a multilingual household, absorbing Spanish and English with equal ease, often present when his mother worked with immigrant families. By the time he was 3, he could understand basic phrases in several languages. In 1887, when James was 4, Marisol discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she felt more confident, knowing what to expect. The pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1888, she delivered a healthy baby girl they named Sarah Maria, blending Russell's American heritage with Marisol's Mexican background. Russell proved to be a devoted father, treating his daughter with the same respect and encouragement he'd always shown Marisol. When other ranchers suggested Sarah should focus only on domestic skills, Russell insisted she learn reading, arithmetic, and eventually Spanish, just like her brother. "Why would I limit my daughter's possibilities?" he'd say, genuinely baffled by the question. "She's as smart as anyone. She should have every opportunity to use that intelligence." The family settled into a rhythm, busy but fulfilling. The ranch continued to grow modestly. Russell hired a young German immigrant named Klaus as a steady hand, and Marisol helped Klaus and his young wife Hilda navigate the complexities of American life. They became friends, the two families sharing meals and celebrations. In 1890, another opportunity arose. A neighboring ranch, owned by an elderly couple with no children, came up for sale. It would double Russell's holdings, but it required significant capital. Russell and Marisol sat up late multiple nights, reviewing finances, considering risks. "We can do it," Russell finally said. "But it'll be tight for a few years. We'll have to be careful, work hard." "When have we ever not worked hard?" Marisol replied with a smile. "Let's do it. Let's build something even bigger, something we can leave to James and Sarah." They purchased the adjacent ranch, and the next few years were intensely busy. Russell managed both properties, often working from dawn until well after dark. Marisol increased her translation work to help with finances, and also began teaching basic English to immigrant families in the evenings, a service she provided free of charge, but which increased her reputation and led to more paid translation jobs. James and Sarah grew up helping on the ranch, learning to ride almost before they could walk properly. James showed a natural affinity for the cattle business, while Sarah surprised everyone with her talent for figures, often helping her mother with the ranch accounts by the time she was 8. In 1893, an economic depression hit the country hard. Cattle prices plummeted. Several ranches near Greeley went under, their owners unable to meet loan payments. Russell and Marisol faced their own crisis, the debt from the expansion suddenly looking precarious. They sat at the kitchen table one night after the children were asleep, the account book spread before them, the numbers grim. "We might lose it," Russell said quietly. "Everything we've built." Marisol reached across the table, taking his hand. "We've survived worse. We'll find a way." And they did, through a combination of creative problem-solving and community support. Marisol took on every translation job available, working long hours. Russell negotiated with their creditors, convincing them that the ranch was viable long-term if they could just weather the short-term crisis. Tom Cross, now elderly but still sharp, provided a bridge loan at friendly terms. The immigrant families Marisol had helped over the years came through in unexpected ways. Several farmers who'd established successful operations, because of her assistance, provided grain and supplies on credit, refusing to let the Vaughn family go hungry. Klaus and Hilda moved into the ranch house to help, Klaus working for reduced wages and Hilda assisting with the children and household so Marisol could focus on paid work. It took 2 years, but they survived the depression. By 1895, cattle prices were recovering, and the ranch was stable again. Russell and Marisol had learned hard lessons about debt and diversification. They began raising horses in addition to cattle, and Marisol established a more formal translation and education service, charging fair rates for her expertise. "We're stronger for having gone through it," Russell said one evening, surveying their property with satisfaction. "We know now we can survive almost anything." "Together," Marisol added. "That's the key. We can survive anything together." As the century turned, the Vaughn family was well established. James, at 17, was taking on more ranch responsibilities, showing good judgment and his father's way with people. Sarah, at 12, announced she wanted to study law, inspired by her mother's advocacy work. Russell and Marisol, now both in their early 40s, had built something substantial and lasting. The town of Greeley had changed too, grown larger and more established. The rough edges of the frontier were smoothing out. Electric lights appeared on Main Street. The railroad expanded. More immigrants continued to arrive, and Marisol's services remained in high demand. One spring evening in 1901, Russell and Marisol sat on their porch watching the sunset, a ritual they'd maintained throughout their marriage. Their hands were linked, weathered and work-worn but still fitting together perfectly. "You remember the day we met?" Russell asked. "That cowboy firing his gun in the street, scaring those Polish families," Marisol laughed. "I called you a damn fool cowboy, though not to your face. You told me years later I wasn't offended. I was a fool, but a lucky one. Lucky you gave me a chance." "Lucky we gave each other a chance," Marisol corrected. "You surprised me, Russell Vaughn. I thought you were just another cowboy looking to charm a woman. Instead, you genuinely wanted to learn, to grow, to understand people different from yourself. You made me want to be better. You still do, every day." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. James was in the barn checking on a mare about to foal. Sarah was inside practicing her Spanish with Klaus and Hilda's daughter, who'd become like a little sister to her. "We've built a good life," Marisol said softly. "Better than I ever imagined possible when I was 16 and alone, scrubbing floors at a hotel. We built it together. Your strength, your intelligence, your compassion. None of this would exist without you." Marisol leaned her head on his shoulder. I love you, Russell. After all these years, I love you more than ever. And I love you. You're my partner, my best friend, the other half of my soul. As full darkness fell and stars began appearing in the vast Colorado sky, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's presence. Inside, they could hear Sarah laughing at something Klaus's daughter said, the sound bright and joyful. From the barn, James called out that the foal was coming, and they rose together to witness new life entering their world, as they'd done countless times before, as partners, as equals, as two people who'd found each other across language barriers and social boundaries and built something lasting and true. The years continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of ranch life. In 1903, James married a schoolteacher named Emily, a quiet young woman with a fierce intelligence that reminded Russell of Marisol. They built a house on the ranch property, James taking on more of the daily management while Russell gradually stepped back, content to advise rather than direct. Sarah, true to her word, went east to study law, one of only a handful of women in her program. Marisol missed her daughter terribly, but was fiercely proud. Sarah wrote long letters describing her studies, the challenges of being a woman in a male profession, and her determination to use her education to help people, particularly immigrants and those without resources. "She's you," Russell said, reading one of Sarah's letters aloud to Marisol. "That same fire to make things fairer, that refusal to accept injustice." "She's us," Marisol corrected. "She has your steadiness too, your ability to see what needs doing and just do it without drama." In 1905, Marisol began a new project that would become her legacy. She compiled her years of translation experience into a series of guidebooks for immigrants, written in multiple languages, explaining American laws, customs, and practical matters like how to file land claims, navigate the court system, and understand their rights as workers. She partnered with immigrant aid societies to distribute the books free or at cost. Russell supported the project completely, even though it meant Marisol spent long hours writing and editing. He took over more household management, learned to cook decent meals, and never complained about the stacks of papers covering every surface of their home. "This is important," he'd say when Marisol apologized for the chaos. "You're helping thousands of people, not just the ones you can meet face to face. I'm proud of you." The guidebooks were remarkably successful. Immigrant communities across Colorado and neighboring states requested copies. Marisol found herself corresponding with aid societies as far away as Chicago and New York, advising them on best practices for helping newcomers adjust to American life. In 1908, Sarah returned to Colorado with her law degree and immediately set up practice in Denver, focusing on immigration and labor law. She visited the ranch regularly, bringing cases she needed translated or researched, mother and daughter working together with the same focused intensity. James and Emily had 3 children by 1910, 2 boys and a girl, and the ranch rang with the sounds of the next generation. Russell and Marisol became doting grandparents, teaching the children to ride, telling them stories, passing on the legacy of respect for all people regardless of their origins. One afternoon in the summer of 1911, Russell found Marisol sitting under the cottonwood tree they'd planted the year they married, now tall and full. She was watching the grandchildren play, a slight smile on her face. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling beside her. "How lucky I am, how lucky we are. All of this," she gestured at the ranch, the playing children, the mountains in the distance. "It seemed impossible once. A mixed-blood orphan girl and a cowboy building all this." "We were never just that," Russell said. "We were always more." We saw that in each other from the start. Marisol took his hand, their fingers intertwining automatically after nearly 3 decades of marriage. You asked me once to teach you my language. I think we ended up teaching each other something more important than vocabulary or grammar. We taught each other about respect, partnership, seeing people for who they truly are. Best education I ever received, Russell said softly. As the years continued, Russell and Marisol settled into the comfortable rhythm of elderhood. They remained active in the ranch management, but let James handle most daily operations. Marisol still took translation jobs, though more selectively, focusing on cases that particularly interested her or seemed most critical. In 1914, as war erupted in Europe, a new wave of immigrants began fleeing the conflict. Many ended up in Colorado, seeking safety and opportunity. Marisol, now 55 but still energetic, threw herself into helping these refugees, people who'd lost everything and were trying to rebuild in a strange land. Russell, at 53, remained her steadfast partner. He used his influence in the ranching community to help refugees find work, vouching for families, convincing other ranchers to give newcomers a chance despite language barriers and cultural differences. One evening, exhausted after a particularly long day helping a Belgian family navigate the complexities of refugee status, Marisol collapsed into bed beside Russell. "I'm getting too old for this," she said, half joking. Russell pulled her close. "You said that 10 years ago and you're still going strong. You'll never be too old to help people. It's who you are." "Who we are," Marisol corrected, as she always did. "I couldn't do any of this without you." In 1917, when America entered the war, James tried to enlist but was rejected due to a childhood injury that had left him with a slightly weakened leg. Instead, he threw himself into the ranch, helping supply beef to the military. Sarah used her legal skills to help families of servicemen navigate the bureaucracy of military benefits and pensions. The war years were difficult, marked by loss and worry. Several young men from Greeley didn't return. But the town pulled together, and the Vaughn family remained at the heart of that community cohesion, providing stability and support. When the war ended in 1918, followed by the devastating flu pandemic, Marisol and Russell were in their late 50s, feeling their age but still active. They helped however they could during the pandemic, Marisol translating medical information for immigrant families, Russell delivering food and supplies to quarantined households. They both caught the flu but survived, though it left them weakened for months. During their recovery, they spent long, quiet hours together, grateful for every day, every moment. "We've had a good run," Russell said one afternoon as they sat wrapped in blankets on the porch, still regaining their strength. "We're not done yet," Marisol replied firmly. "We have grandchildren to watch grow up. Sarah's wedding to attend whenever she finally settles down, and I have at least 3 more guidebooks planned." Russell laughed, the sound still making Marisol's heart lift after all these years. "God help any disease that thinks it can slow you down." Marisol Vaughn. In 1920, Sarah finally married a fellow lawyer named David who shared her passion for justice and her respect for her remarkable parents. The wedding was held at the ranch, a joyous gathering of family and friends, immigrants and ranchers, a community that reflected everything Russell and Marisol had built together. During the reception, Tom Cross, now in his 90s and one of the last surviving founders of the area, raised a toast. "I knew Russell Vaughn when he was just a green ranch hand with more dreams than sense. I watched him meet Marisol and become the man he was always meant to be. Together, they've shown us all what partnership looks like, what respect looks like, what building a real community means. To Russell and Marisol, the crowd echoed the toast, and Marisol felt tears prick her eyes. Russell squeezed her hand, his eyes suspiciously bright as well. The 20s brought prosperity to the ranch and continued satisfaction to Russell and Marisol's life. They were grandparents 7 times over, with rumors of more on the way. The ranch was thriving under James's management. Sarah and David had opened a law practice that was making real differences in people's lives. Marisol continued her translation work and advocacy into her 60s, though at a slower pace. She mentored younger translators and published a final, comprehensive guidebook that became standard issue for immigration officials across several states. Russell remained her constant supporter, still attending community meetings with her, still standing beside her when she advocated for fair treatment of immigrants. One evening in the spring of 1925, they sat on their porch as the sun set, as they'd done thousands of times before. They were both 66 now, weathered and tired but content. Their hands were clasped together, a habitual gesture of connection. "You ever regret it?" Russell asked suddenly. "Not the marriage, but the compromises. You could have done so much more if you hadn't tied yourself to a rancher to this life." Marisol turned to him, surprised. "Russell Vaughn, after 42 years of marriage, you still don't understand. I didn't compromise. I chose. I chose you. I chose this life. I chose to build something meaningful with a partner who valued me completely. Everything I've accomplished, I accomplished because you stood beside me, supporting me, believing in me. I have no regrets. Do you?" "Not a single one," Russell said softly. "Asking you to teach me Spanish was the best decision I ever made. Not because of the language, though that's been useful, but because it brought you into my life. You made me better, Marisol. You made everything better." They kissed gently, a gesture still tender after all these decades. Around them, the ranch settled into evening quiet. From James's house came the sound of children playing. In the barn, someone was singing a Mexican folk song Russell had taught them years ago. The mountains stood eternal against the darkening sky. "We've built something good," Marisol said, leaning against Russell's shoulder. "Something that will last beyond us." "We built it together," Russell replied. "That's the secret. Not just the work, but doing it together as partners with respect and love." As darkness fell and stars emerged in the vast Colorado sky, Russell and Marisol remained on the porch, wrapped in shared warmth and shared memories. They had started as a translator and a cowboy, brought together by a request to learn a language. But what they'd taught each other went far deeper than words. They'd learned about respect across differences, about building partnership on equality, about creating family and community from nothing but will and love. The land they'd worked stretched around them, solid and real. The family they'd created continued inside. The grandchildren finally settling down for the night, James and Emily discussing the next day's work. Letters from Sarah describing her latest legal victories sitting on the table. Everything they'd built, every person they'd helped, every barrier they'd broken, had started with a simple conversation on a street in Greeley, Colorado, in the summer of 1882. Russell and Marisol sat together until the mountain air grew too cold, then went inside to the home they'd made, to the bed they'd shared for 42 years, to the life they'd built word by word, day by day, always together. And they were content, knowing they'd created something lasting and true, a legacy of love and respect and partnership that would echo through generations, long after their own story ended. In the morning, they would wake to another day of work and family, challenges and joys. But tonight, they simply rested in each other's presence. Two people who'd found each other across barriers of language and culture and built a love that translated into any tongue. Profound, enduring, and absolutely true.